on our board, actually, which is great. We work with all levels of government, federal, provincial, regional, municipal. We have two First Nations directors on our board. Lots of involvement with industry. We do a lot of training with industry, so foresters, utility folks, you know, all levels, mining, roads. You know, as you know, we've talked about all morning. There's invasive species know no borders, and I think, you know, everyone needs to be involved. So I'm a biologist. I work in the education and outreach piece, and my passion is really biodiversity. I mean, we live in such an incredible region in the Pacific Northwest, and invasive species is a particular interest of mine because it's such a big threat to the biodiversity that we have. Let's see. All right. So I'm going to talk about public engagement. I think I would argue that it's probably our most important tool when we're dealing with well, any kind of environmental outreach, but particularly invasive species, and trying to get people to be aware of them, be aware of their impacts, and also you know, give them some responsible actions to take. Lots of challenges. I've worked in environmental education and outreach for about 25 years, so I've thought a lot about this issue and dug into some of the research, and we all know some of the challenges. So I'll go through those, and then I'll take a look at some of the strategies, some of the things that seems to have worked, both in the literature and for us, and then some of the examples that we've worked through in British Columbia. And I must say, it's nice to see a few Canadians here this afternoon. This is the first time that I've come down to the council's meetings, and it's nice to you know, have this cross-pollination across the border. The Canadians are invading. So what's engagement? So let's think about the topic itself. When you look at the definition, it talks about being a personal connection. So, and it's got a lot of elements to engagement, you know, whether it's the personal type of engagement or more of a public issue engagement. So there's what people know, what people feel, like the cognitive and the emotional, as well as what people do. The thing about engagement is it's not a linear thing. So just because you know something is not a good thing to do or, you know, or have in your garden, doesn't mean necessarily that you're going to do something about it. So that's often the challenge that we as public educators face. And there's lots of spheres of engagement. There's obviously the public engagement, but there's also the private. So there's different levels as well as different elements to the whole issue of engagement. So the challenges that come up that I think many of us face are, you know, essentially the noise. Like we all are bombarded with information all the time from many different areas, and where, you know, how do we get our message through that? There's a lot of individual barriers. Everybody's different. There's no such thing as a general public. You know, everyone has different attitudes, values, comes from different cultures. Invasive species is a science issue generally, or science-based, and that can be a big barrier for some people. They think that it's too complicated or too big. As I said, there's many diverse publics, and there's lots of institutional barriers, which is, I think, an important thing that we all need to recognize when we're thinking about how our organizations deal with engaging people. And it's also difficult to measure. So sometimes it's a hard sell for funders, like, why should I pay for this big workshop or this big piece of outreach? So let's go through them one by one. So the noise piece is something that we all deal with, the information that the information overload that we live with in the world. And how do we reach audiences to engage them through all that noise, whether it's social media, whether it's, you know, the typical normal media, all the different kind of distractions. And then the individual barriers. So some people, there's a lack of knowledge. People don't know about invasive species. They don't know about their impacts or how they're moved around. But there's also lots of competing interests, lots of agendas that different people have. And the information deficit model is something that has been used for decades. And the whole idea of that type of change is you give someone the knowledge that something is, you know, is bad for them, and they will automatically, you know, change their behavior. It doesn't work. And we know that, you know, people don't necessarily take rational action when they know that something's bad for them. So the third thing that comes up a lot is this issue that it's a science issue. People tend to turn off. They think it's too big, too complicated, or that it's too big, that they, as an individual, what can an individual do, against such a big issue? So people question whether they can actually have an impact. And it's a really easy thing to kind of give up and kind of go numb and think, oh, I just can't deal with it. And then there's many diverse publics. As I said, there's no such thing as the public. There's many backgrounds. We all come from different cultures, from different backgrounds. We have different frames of reference. So we look at things in different ways. So even if you take one group that we work with, like anglers, there's anglers, everybody from the guy with the bamboo fishing pole to the guy with the multi-million-dollar boat, or the woman with the multi-billion-dollar boat. Different resources, there's different values, and there's different capacities that people have. So it's important I think the golden rule of engagement is to really know your audience, be very specific, and get really that, understand that information in a really intimate way. And I think this is a really important one. The idea that sometimes our institutions actually put out barriers in and of themselves. So we often, whether knowingly or unknowingly, we don't engage people where they are. So in British Columbia, there's a lot of remote communities. There's a lot of Indigenous communities. There's many, many language groups. So, do we put our information out in different languages? Do we go to those remote communities and engage where the people are and where they're living and understand where they're coming from? So, all those different pieces are something that we need to look at as organizations to say, okay, are we doing the best job we can in terms of that institutional piece? And there tends to be, and unfortunately it sometimes is government, there's that paternalistic attitude or paternalistic culture that discourages input from a range of people. So, something to be aware of. And then, as I mentioned before, this whole idea of measuring the benefits. Like, we know, intuitively that it's important to engage people, but it's expensive. We know that workshops and, meetings, networking meetings like this work way better than presentations or, pamphlets or, phone calls. But it's often a hard sell. So, to measure the impact of what we're doing. And then how do we show that to citizens and to our funders? So, the criteria of what engagement is an important piece. So then when we look at this, what are some of the things that can help us overcome some of these barriers? So as I said, this is kind of the golden rule. So you need to know your audience really, really well. So go to them, figure them out. The whole idea is, ask, who are you, rather than, this is what I want you to know. You want to know what they know. You want to know where their context is, what their frames of reference are, and what their relationships have been with institutions, because that's often a big negative. We work a lot with Indigenous communities in British Columbia, and that's one of the things that we come up against a lot. So know your audience, and then get them engaged early. And this is kind of a basic thing, but if you're doing a program or a project in a region, go in early and get people engaged right at the start and give them authentic, relevant engagement in your process. So this spectrum of involvement, it comes actually from the Center for Policy Alternatives, but it's kind of an interesting one because you start realizing that there's different levels of getting people involved. And there's sort of the lip service level where you maybe give information meetings, but the decision has already been made. Then there's the involvement piece where you actually do get obtain some feedback from people, whether you do something with that as the next step. And sometimes that's a hard one to roll into something. The consulting phase, when you're actually doing a workshop, you're planning with people, you're planning with the audience that is going to be impacted by the program. And then there's a collaborative place where you actually have an advisory committee of anglers or of gardeners or of industry people, foresters, where they give you recommendations and then you try to implement those recommendations as much as you can. And then the final stage, which often groups don't get to, is this idea that, you are the audience of this program, and so the decision-making is in your hands. So it's important, I think, to think about where we are when we do our programming and our outreach on this kind of spectrum of involvement. And, recognize recognize where we are and try to move forward on it. So then there's the credibility piece, and I think this one is an important one too. So, who are we? We're a little nonprofit in British Columbia. How do we get our message across that we look credible, that we look like we walk the talk, and that we should be respected and believed in? I should say that we work with 13 or 14 other nonprofits across the province. Several of them are within the room. So we work at a provincial level, and then we have regional partners all across the province, other nonprofits as well as governments. And, it's a really important network, and just getting that word out as to who we are is an important piece. So this is kind of a basic one, right? And this might, impact our personal relationships and engagements too. Are these people credible? Are they honest? Do they have integrity? Do they walk the talk? And do they communicate clearly? So, they tell you who they are in the 90-second spiel and get that message across. And then the message piece is so important. So how clear is your message? All the PR gurus say, less is more. You want a brand or a slogan that stands out, but it also has to be relevant to your audience itself. And when you're talking about your message, the most important part of it is the why. So, why should I do this? Why should I clean, drain, dry my boat? Well, you're stopping invasive species. You're protecting BC waters or Washington waters. Why should I be plant-wise? Because you're not going to grow. You've committed to not growing invasive species in your garden. So those pieces, why is it relevant to the audience? Why should they care? And then what's your promise? If you do this activity, what are you promised to get out of it? And the other piece that's come up a lot in environmental work is this whole idea of giving people practical actions that they can do that actually make a difference. So, most of us want to see some kind of result from our action. So if you can give somebody a tool, an idea, whether it's the reporting tool, whether it's something physical that they can do, and they can see something meaningful that comes out of it, you've got them engaged, you've got them hooked, and they will continue doing that behavior. And then the last one I'll talk briefly about is this whole idea of positioning. So, you've got your message, you've got your branding, you've figured out your audience, but where is your audience? So where does your audience need to discover that information? Is it at the boat launch where the big clean, drain, dry signs are? Is that where you're going to reach the people the most? Is it through social media? What platforms are you going to use? And then what's the voice? What's your, how is your message going to be delivered? Does it sound too paternalistic, or does it resonate with your audience? So those are big, big pieces of both the positioning and the delivery of your message. So, as the poster, by the boat launch, have you got your invasive beetle information on a door hanger where people might have it in their trees? Do you have your "Don't Let It Loose" sticker on your little bag of goldfish that you're taking home from the pet store? There's of course, the social media is such an important piece, and the apps that we have both in BC and Washington are so great for that. But really think about that positioning. And again, that's really knowing your audience. Some audiences don't use social media as much, some do. Again, knowing your audience and knowing the best platform to reach them. So I'll just talk briefly about 3 programs that we've been working with provincially in British Columbia. As I mentioned, we do a lot of work with First Nations groups. So for the last couple of years, about 2.5 years ago, we hired a First Nations and Indigenous Liaison, or a partnership coordinator. So we worked with Jake. He works directly with us with the different First Nations bands that we worked with, and it really helped both in terms of getting our message out, but it also helped us with being culturally appropriate when we were approaching bands, when we were approaching elders and tribal councils, to sort of strike the right balance and make the appropriate connection. So that was a big piece that we've learned a lot from. We also went and asked them. We had a Indigenous Toolkit for managing invasive species on territorial lands, and we updated it. We started it in 2011, and we took about a year to update it, and went to the audience. We went to 17 different communities in British Columbia, got extensive feedback from those communities. What do you guys need? What do you want in this thing? What's useful for you? And they said, we want more case studies of bands that have had successes. We want a list of agencies that we need to contact when we have issues. You know, we want some sample bylaws in there. We want a way to respond to referrals from industry. So we were able to put all those in the toolkit. These is all free to download on our website, all these resources, and I brought some copies at the back too. And then they also wanted some on-the-ground programs. So we were actually able to go through the Real Dividend Project and work directly with 5 Indigenous communities in BC, do some training of community members, give them an integrated management plan, and have them leave them with tools and spray packages and information to actually manage their species. So that's been a great program. We also have a network around BC, an Indigenous Invasive Species Network. We've got 129 members now, and we do conference calls 4 or 5 times a year, and they really help us drive our programs too. When we reach out to them, they say, well, you know, this is what we'd love in the north, or this is what we really need, you know, on the island. So the second group that we've had some successes with is with educators. So again, we went, you know, to the educators themselves, whether it's the formal, the teachers, or the non-formal educators with the guides and the scouts and the 4-H groups. Had professional development workshops, we had advisory groups and reviewers, and then we piloted resources that we did over several years with different groups of educators to see that they're actually usable, that they're relevant, that they're either tied to curriculum or project-based, that people could actually use them and implement them well. So this Invasive-Wise Youth Challenge has been great. We've been piloting across the north. It's a newer program that we've been developing. And the teachers said, you know, we want presentations that are ready to go. We want your PowerPoint, basically. We want those pictures. We want some activities that can be Monday morning ready, but we also want to be able to adapt them to our species and to our kids. You know, we want a step-by-step plan that helps us, especially in the field work. And one of the main things they ask for, which is kind of a no-brainer, is that they want an invasive species expert that they can either phone up, send pictures to, or have them come out to their, if they're adopting a school ground or a senior center or a green space in their community, to come out and take a look at those plants and say, oh yeah, you can pull this, it's safe, or, you know, you don't want to touch that, that's giant hogweed. So, you know, those are all things that we were then able to build into the program to make it that much more usable for the teachers and for the educators. Oh, and just back to the non-formal, we actually worked with Girl Guides in British Columbia for 3 years, and we actually got a Girl Guide badge, which is so great, an invasive species badge. And now we're working with both the Boy Scouts, and I think you guys have 4-H in Washington as well, trying to you know, take a look at their programming and take a look at exactly where invasive species and invasive species removal fits, and then develop stuff that they can use. And then the last program I'll speak to is this Invasive-Wise Marinas program that we started a few years ago. So we've been working with the boating industry and the anglers for years, for about 12 years. And we realized that we needed to go really deep with the boating industry. So the retailers, the boat haulers, all the people that potentially are involved with moving aquatic invasive species around. So we took about 1.5 years. We built a big contact list of, you know, marinas, of the boat haulers and the brokers. And that has become a really good communications tool. So when we get new materials, new information, we can send it out to that listserv. And then we did 5 workshops across the province where we got sort of solicited needs from these folks. And, you know, if we're going to give you invasive species stuff, how do you want it? What's the best format? So they said, you know, don't bug us now. Come in the winter. We're way too busy. We can't talk to you now. Go to where we are. So come to our events, come to the boat shows, come to the big boat sales, you know, come to our AGMs. So we've started to do that. Give us some webinars so we can show a little 10-minute webinar to our staff so they know how to clean, drain, dry a boat, and how, you know, give us some, you know, horror stories about invasive species so we really get them excited about it. Target the non-motorized boaters. It's not just us that are the bad guys, right? It's the, you know, anything can spread invasive species, so make sure you target those folks. Give us some best practices for the boating industry, and also go after some of the existing programs. So in BC, we have a Clean Marine program, which is like a green Guide to Green Boating. So we were able to get invasive species information into that program. So then when marinas are certified, they have to go through that checklist as well. So, you know, piggyback on existing programs, essentially, that this industry is already using. So the pilot program, we've developed that information, so we have the best practices. We have some posters, window cling decals that a marina will give to their clients about clean, drain, dry, a big aquatic invasive species poster that they can show off at the marinas or on their boat launches, and then developing a lot of new partnerships with the canoe clubs, with the boat clubs, and engaging those kind of audiences. So we've got some new information for paddlers and for anglers and for the marinas as well. So we tried to listen to them and give them the stuff that they wanted. So just to summarize, you know, again, the golden rule, really know your audience well. You know, good engagement is rooted in your audience's needs. It's not what you need to tell them, but how they want to hear it and how they need the information that they need. Get them involved early. And remember that spectrum of involvement that your organization needs to keep in mind. Be really credible. So if you say you're going to do something in a community or in a territory, actually do it, and be consistent and transparent when you do it. Be really clear with your messaging, and remember, less is more. You know, we were talking earlier about how stickers and little small wallet cards seem to be the more, the thing that people like to pick up. People are not grabbing the brochures and the big booklets anymore. Give them some actions that are really defined and relevant and actionable and show results. And then remember your positioning. So think about your audience and where they need to find that information. I think that's my last slide. Thank you. Any questions? Do we have time for questions? I think we're good. Thank you.